I met with Alexis, as you can imagine, when we sit down and prepare, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And one of the things that both of us felt strongly about was that we want this to be a conversation and not so much a lecture at you all. So during the conversation, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll engage, because I think that that's going to help us keep the conversation going anyway. But conversation, not lecture, okay? So I already said that part. What I was saying is that I had the pleasure to work with Alexis in her final semester at PNCA, and again, it's a really critical time. I wanted to ask her to actually give you just a small synopsis of the body of work as a base for us to begin to develop questions and think about that. So with that, just tell us a small about it.
Yeah, so first I want to say thank you to everyone for coming today, and then a brief synopsis. So to create these pieces, which I call mixed media tapestries or bricolage tapestries, I take photographs of scenes from my day-to-day life that remind me of memory, time passing, and female experience. And then I question and complicate these original compositions by using paint and thread and collage and cutting. And I see these as kind of psychological spaces because I see this process as mirroring how our memories, our perceptions, our emotions are all constructed in the mind from individual moments that are accurate or inaccurate, pivotal or minute. They're all fused together indiscriminately.
Is that true with all the works that are in here?
I'd say that's an overall arch for my whole practice.
One of the assets that I have that maybe not all of you all have is that I've gotten to see the work grow over the at least 2-year period, if not 3. And one of the things that I notice a lot about this body of work is the shift. She's definitely interior, exterior, that's always been the truth, but the figure is a really big part of this body of work, which I don't believe is true in your MFA body. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so for your thesis defense, you have to be able to speak to and kind of explain why you made all of the different decisions in your artwork. So say I would do rooms and interior scenes because I would reference Carl Jung and his dream theory where rooms are different aspects of your personality. And why all the windows, those are portals or gateways to different areas of the mind, or kind of referencing compartmentalization, a defense mechanism. Mirrors were referencing Jacques Lacan. Everything from my thesis thing I wanted to have an answer for. For this body of work, I kind of took those restraints off of myself and let me instead choose compositions and imagery that I was just more inspired by. And so the figure came into them, and there's friends and family, which I don't expect the viewer to see. I expect them to see them more as just models or kind of archetypes, launching points for narratives.
Will you define bricolage?
Yes, so bricolage is something that I've been working with from the thesis on to now. And bricolage is similar to collage, but it involves many different types of materials. And so often these are repurposed or easy to find, cheaper things. And so I've been finding clothing and bedding and curtains. And in my last body of work, I was using things like wallpaper and paper as well. And I'll combine all of these. And I see this similar to the same interest that I was discussing before. I see this process as where I take all of these separate materials and merge them together to create this cohesive piece, as similar to the same process of memory where it's all the different moments coming together.
I just heard you say clothing, bedding, curtains, which now all of a sudden I'm putting that thought together. They feel like a lot of domestic materials. A lot of times when I look at this work, I think more about paint, collage, and cutting than I think necessarily about the materials it's made with. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I'm using a wide variety of materials. Kind of a rule for myself is whatever I think will fit best. I have baskets full of things of different colors grouped by color. So they're the green fabric, blue fabric, purple fabric, and I'll pull them together with a idea of what I want to get into a certain area, and I'll pull from these different things to create this kind of effect. By not sticking to one medium, but allowing myself the flexibility to go wherever I deem it would be best. I think that it's kind of bringing all of these different materials to the same level, and I like to think of it as subverting the historical hierarchy of different types of craft media, because I'm taking glue and beads and fabric and presenting them with paint and photograph and creating a piece where they're all on the same plane.
Are they your clothes?
A lot of them have been my clothes. Other are friends and family member clothes. I also will go to places like Scrap or Goodwill and buy things.
In all of your, any questions so far now?
Because you're using fabric and instead of everything being on a rigid support, it's soft and draped and the edges are like curtains. To me, it looks very theatrical, like they're stage set. Is that something you're consciously doing?
I'd say when I set out, it wasn't super conscious, but I definitely acknowledge that, and I've seen it evolve into looking very theatrical. In the radio interview I did, I specifically mentioned this piece and thinking it was theatrical. And I like that, because one of the things I'm thinking about is how these social constructs, these social norms that we see are, how they become norms. Just like memories, just like these other things, are little pieces grow into becoming something that we acknowledge as true. So I was thinking kind of a performanity in that, and performance of femininity potential in that piece right there.
And don't you think, and maybe this is almost a question for you more than Alexis, so you could respond, that part of that comes from like the drape and the way that it's breaking beyond the frame all of a sudden? It was definitely something that developed over the course of watching her. Like, even when I was first started working with her, it was really square. And then all of a sudden she broke that edge and was like miraculous to be able to really go there. But to see the way the drape is like become a very full part of the experience in this has really changed it a lot. A new thing to think about now.
Yeah, I think it makes it a little more sculptural too, and I like crossing these different barriers and adds to that.
One of the aspects of the work that I'm really interested in is the conversation about craft, whether it be, you know, the combining of many different practices, or handcraft, or kind of the way that the material gets used, which you haven't really spoken to. And actually, the one word that I haven't heard you say today that I think is so interesting is sewing.
Yeah.
You haven't, not only you said that you hand stitched, you used the machine like a drawing board, actually, in the way that it gets played out here. Can you talk to us a little about that?
So yeah, I see sewing in multiple ways. As we discussed, it definitely is used to secure pieces and to make it strong and a durable artwork. But I also use it as other artists would use a pencil or a paintbrush. I'll make gesture lines with it. I'll accentuate areas with the sewing. It's very intentional. I could just as easily use a paintbrush a lot of times, but I'm choosing to use the sewing as a gestural tool.
Could you break this actually down into all the different parts? Like, some people, if you don't know a lot about it, you might just be looking at it. All of a sudden you see, okay, this is pretty photographic here. But then there's painted image on here. Sorry, don't touch it. But and just kind of walk us through, because it's perfectly confusing as to, you know, where the lines get really slippery or muddy. It's not muddy because the images are crisp, you know, but I don't know, just take us through all the different processes.
Yeah, definitely. So this piece and the piece converged with the red flowers on the table. Those two have something different in it than all of the others. I photoshopped and manipulated the initial image in these one a bit, which just makes it a little weirder from the beginning. So in this piece, we have a double image of a figure and a dog, and a figure and a dog. And from there, I wanted just to make it stranger and stranger and stranger. So we have fabric, we have bead. This has been painted and then drawn over and then stitched on top of that. I've created many of these portals that I've talked about right here, and here, and here, here. One of the things I like to do a lot is this mimicry. So there's threads here that I'm mimicking the weaving of the basket. And again, on the shelf, might as well just put these beads and these other pieces of fabric as if they're items on the shelf. So I wouldn't want a large segment of just photograph. I wouldn't want a large segment of just fabric or just paint. I really like to mix them all up to the most I can while still keeping it cohesive and weighing this balance between messy and clean. It's a large component of my work.
Can you talk a little bit about the double image of the dog?
Yeah, so, sorry. The piece is called Echo, and so the double image is kind of a repeat. I guess the name came from the double image, but I'm thinking about time and memory and space and changing location within space. So the space stays the same, but the figures and the objects and time passes within it. And that was kind of a main thought for that duplication.
The images seem to become, or maybe the figure seems to become a focal point, and yet the plane is actually fairly even. Is there a focal point to this work?
I'm a focal point. Yeah, I like to have compositions where your eyes moved around. I like to have an initial draw and then let your eye wander and find other points of interest afterwards. So often, in this piece at least, it's very strong that the figure is the focal point and then your eye moves around and you find all the other attributes hidden amongst it, and other pieces that's less important.
Yeah.
How did these, how did these start? In other words, you've got a lot going on. So do you do a drawing? Do you try it out? How do you?
Sometimes I'll mess around on my computer a little bit before, just blocking out colors to see what different effects that will have. But a lot of it is studio and material play. Or I'll even say when I'm taking the photo, a lot of times maybe I'll think, oh, I could replicate this with this. So there's that thought when I'm taking the initial image sometimes. But mostly they start with me taking the photograph, editing it to some extent, printing it onto fabric, and then it's kind of a free-for-all, and not all pieces make it, and I work through a lot of pieces, and it's great when the ones get to where they need to be.
I don't know if this is any kind of insight or not, but her studio is really messy.
In the piece Echo that we're just talking about, one of the things that I find really intriguing is the way there's a piece of fabric that's like in the portal or window on the right. From my perspective on the right, there's like a floral fabric or like a pattern fabric that's like, it starts outside the window where it feels like it's like shrubbery or something, but then it comes inside the window. No, Nan, you were pointing
This one or this one?
That one.
Yeah.
Anna pointing out. And then it starts to feel like drapery, and there's this interesting like play where it's like where you're like, I don't know if this is like supposed to be the tree outside the window or the curtain inside the house. And that kind of like, you talked a little bit about portals, and I'm just wondering if that kind of, because you're presenting interior spaces and a few exterior spaces, but there's this sort of like dialogue between the inside of the image and the outside of the image within the picture itself.
Yes, so I think that kind of perceptual slipperiness is exactly what I'm going for, where it isn't really easy to define that is exactly what that is doing. I like it to have different roles that these different patterns and colors and objects are playing. And this merging between interior and exterior, I think that I'm thinking about memory again when I'm thinking about that, how you can be sitting inside someplace and then recalling something that happened across the world 10 years ago, and you'll be influenced by those thoughts at the same time.
How does your background in psychology influence that work?
I think that was just where I first was introduced to a lot of these theories and ideas about memory and these mental mechanisms. I'm really interested in how this works and how memory is what we use to form our perceptions of the world, to form all of these ideas about ourselves, our own identities. But memory is constantly deteriorating. It's incredibly unreliable. It's replaced by itself over and over again. When you remember a memory, you remember the last time you remembered it. So the
into the portal, and just kind of pick that apart a little bit for us. I mean, now that you said it, I look for it in everyone. You know, and some feel like they get real deep, like her phone goes forever. But maybe just talk to us a little bit more about what that portal is.
I think I touched on it a little bit before, but the portal I see as these opportunities to make these perceptually strange and conceptually to tie in different emotions or types of imagery. So it can be an image that looks really calm or quiet, and I can use these to throw in something a little more disturbing or active. I use them to add complexity into the piece, and here it's very much that optical perception with the phone, because you walk back and forth, and again, the strangeness of that.
When you were talking about how your studio is set up in color, I think that's an interesting way to categorize things. And when I look around the room, I feel like there is usually a tone to each piece, whether it be green or blue or a kind of shininess to the fabric or something like that. Is that a conscious part of what's happening here? Like, this feels blue, this one is the blue one.
Yeah, they don't start out that way, but as I'm working through the piece and manipulating it, it definitely happened. And so, as I said, I have the basket, so I'll be looking for blue, I'll dump out all the blue, and then I'll just be pulling up all the blue to figure it out. And then I realized that yellow was the other color for this. They're kind of complementing. And so then I was picking the pieces, secondary pieces for the color and the texture and the pattern, playing back and forth. So it is intentional.
Why do you think color becomes a defining sort of way to move into the work? Is it mood or?
I think it's mood and tone, and it's painterly decisions. I first was, well, not first, but I definitely consider myself a painter, and these originally began as paintings. They become mixed media works, and that's what I call them now, but I definitely approach them with a painter's eye.
Yeah.
It's quite involved.
Yeah.
So how long do you work on one piece? Or do you work on several at the same time?
Yeah, so I first have a stage where I'm collecting the photographs, collecting the compositions that I'm going to be working on, and I'm doing that all the time, but there's usually a focus stage where I've just got my camera on me all the time, and say the picture of the hallway back there with the little girls running down it, I just had my camera on me and I was able to capture that moment as she was running towards me. And then I print many of them out at one time, and I'll then start working on them interchangeably, maybe 4 at a time, going back and forth, back and forth. And as I said, not all of them made it here, so many of them got cut along the way. So working on them multiple pieces at a time, and maybe I'll do a painting day where I'm mostly painting on them, and then I'll let them dry, and then I'll be working on another set that were further along, and I'll stitch on those, and then put those down, and maybe put backings on another set. So it's switching from piece to piece to piece, and they slowly evolve over a long period of time.
The other thing that you don't see here that I happen to know about Alexis is she makes a lot of work, and then she curates it down. So even though this is what we're seeing, I suspect there's probably 6 more in her studio that are in a state of being made, or they didn't quite make the cut in her own mind, so that she gets to curate and edit according to what the conversation in the space is, things along those lines. Where do you go from here? Is there a kind of something displayed through, like, I just defined that that's your next body of work, but where do you think that you go?
I think one of the key things I took away from this exhibition is the type of starting photographs I want to go off of. I like these more forced perspectives that you see in this piece and in the hallway piece in the back right corner. So I see more works that have that happening in them. I am still going to explore the different materials. It'll still be fabric. I still see displaying in this way for the near future. Yeah.
Do you use only your own photographs, or do you have some that sometimes jump out at you?
For the overall compositions, I only use my own photographs at this point, and I think it's just when I'm taking the photograph, I'm kind of thinking about this process at the same time. It's very connected, and I think I'm more inspired using my own photographs. Yes.
Do you see yourself like as a photographer then within the process, or is it just something that's a part of the process that you initially start with?
I say that I definitely, at that time, am seeing myself as a photographer. I think it's part.
Do you use a smartphone or a camera?
I have a DSLR camera that I use, the lens, and so it's this big heavy thing that I'm carrying around with me everywhere. Yeah.
How do you source materials, and how do the materials hold the concept of the memory that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but a lot of them are my own clothing from my sisters or family members or friends, and then other repurposed materials from, say, scrap or Goodwill.
Again, your pieces are quite three-dimensional, especially this one.
Yes.
It comes from how do you create that fold?
The folding,
It's not all the folds are obvious, like fold. They just come forward and back.
so some of the folds is how I attach the pieces of fabric to the piece, and then other is the mounting. So for this piece and the one opposite of the orange couch, both of these is the magnets, and so I do have specific spots where the magnets are supposed to go, and that's creating these intentional folds on the top of the piece.
That's really actually like blowing out the dimensionality of the work in a new way. I think because it felt, this is sort of, it always felt logical to just put them up and flatten them out and get them all right and straight and everything, but to see this begin to happen, it's a kind of reiteration of what's going on in here that I think is really exciting, actually. I like the way that they grow off the wall. Now you have to go not just 2 inches off the wall, but maybe 4, and really start to get them.
6.
Yeah, 6, yes, 6. Any other questions here, y'all? Yeah.
Well, I could throw one out there. Could you talk at all about ideas you might be having in terms of surrealism? Because I look at these and I really feel like there's a very strong narrative content. And I'm also sort of, not that they look like this, but it brings to mind the work of like Lenore Carrington, some of the other women surrealists who are really having a moment the last few years.
I think the surrealists were really interested into psychology. They were really interested in dreams. So I definitely see these tied to those in that sense. So it's, we're thinking about similar things when we're creating our pieces. There's definitely a connection there.
You're about to go to Mocha.
Yes.
What are you going to do there? What's your tool? Your sewing machine and a...
Yeah, I think I'm going to bring 2 suitcases, and I'm just going to stack it full. So I'm going to North Adams, Massachusetts, to the Museum of Contemporary Art there, and they're having so they have regular artist residencies, but this is a specific Women in the Arts residency. So there'll be 12 other female artists and I'll actually be participating in a symposium there called Forefront, where I'll have a piece on display, and I'm really excited for it. It'll be a month, and I've never done anything like this before, so we'll see how it goes.
No, elaborate on the toolkit that you're going to take.
Oh, the toolkit. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring my sewing machine, and then I think I'm gonna have just one checked bag full of art supplies, and then a checked bag with my clothes.
Which you may not come back with.
That happens. That does happen.
She's going to be wearing a piece.
The green, there's like a turquoise and that purple piece in the back with the orange cows, and it's on the side, and I was definitely wearing that shirt, and I wanted that turquoise, and I was like, all right, you gotta go.
I feel there's a big difference or development from your last exhibition, and I wanted to see what you feel are the differences, or like one main change that happened to this last exhibition.
I mean, the figure is a huge one. I couldn't fully speak to why I wanted to use a figure in my thesis body, so I just omitted them. True. And
That's
so
a method.
this one, I'm allowing myself to use it, and I'm still trying to figure out what exactly that means, but that would be the biggest change that I see.
Well, I would encourage everybody to
have coffee and linger. I want to thank Nan, I want to thank Alexis, and talk further to Alexis or Lacey, are both here.